I am Linda van Tilburg for National Security News. In what is considered one of the most extensive cybersecurity breaches to date, hackers have targeted Snowflake, a premier cloud storage provider. A substantial volume of data was compromised and stolen from hundreds of customers that were notified about the theft, and it included Ticketmaster and LendingTree. Joining us in the NSN studio is Blake Cahen, the Director of Cybersecurity at IronNet, to discuss how cybersecurity firms can proactively combat info stealers and collaborate to address cyber breaches. Hi, Blake. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, no, pleasure's all mine. Glad to be here.
Well, this breach that we were talking about, how would IronNet detect and then respond to such an incident?
Yeah, absolutely. So, looking back at the Mandiant report, looking at, how the compromise took place, months to years prior to the Snowflake data breach, info stealers were deployed and extracted the sensitive data from the affected entities, which those credentials were used in this subsequent Snowflake data breach. So things we would have looked at, how the info stealer made its way to the endpoint. So, it would have had to been downloaded or infected in the host in some way, shape, or form. So that activity, that network-based detection is where we would have looked, in addition to how that data left the victim environment. So, info stealers are doing exactly what it sounds like. They're stealing information from the victims, and that has to go external to the victim network. It has to go to an adversary-controlled infrastructure, command and control infrastructure. And our network detections and our proactive threat feeds specific to detecting those adversary infrastructures are some of the things we would put in place in combination with whatever else the customer had, their EDRs, their firewalls, to have a comprehensive detection footprint to try and not only identify when it was downloaded and infected the victim, but when they're taking that data externally to the network.
So, what is a threat hunter?
Yeah, so threat hunting and a subsequent threat hunter are terms for, proactively looking for threats inside of an environment. So traditional cybersecurity models, you have your infrastructure, your cybersecurity tools and capabilities that are monitoring, looking for alerts based on a number of detection criteria. Threat hunting is taking behaviors, techniques, tactics, and looking at all the data and sources that you have inside of an environment and trying to find the threats that are not being detected by your cybersecurity ecosystem, your existing tools.
You have this concept of a collective defense strategy at IronNet. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So collective defense is certainly IronNet's, bread and butter, but it's a term that you hear more and more commercially throughout, all industries. It's the concept of sharing data so that a compromise or a threat against one member of the collective is not isolated. You look at any kind of breach today. How long is it before those details are commercially known? If it's a company that is publicly traded or maybe a healthcare customer, financial, they have certain requirements that may prevent them from disclosing it for weeks to months later. So being a part of this collective defense community enables you to take that compromised data, those indicators of compromise, and share them instantaneously across all the members.
So, is it fair to liken this to a social network of cybersecurity?
Yeah, that's certainly a good way of putting it. You're just enabling all these independent customers, community members, to share this threat data without manual input, automated, instantaneous.
Blake, how many customers do you have inside your collective?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now we have somewhere in the realm of 75 community members or contributors, all of which across industries, sectors, globally, that are sharing this data in that automated and anonymous fashion. That's another big point here. And something that really comes into play when we talk about information sharing across, the industry as a whole. People are very concerned about sharing their data. They're very concerned about what other people have access to, especially when you talk about government versus private versus public sector. So our platform is uniquely designed to anonymize that data to only distribute that threat information, those indicators and that correlation of alerts.
So who are behind these threats? Because if we look at this Snowflake one, there was a link to a Ukraine worker or employee for EPAM. Does that give you an indication of who might be behind it?
So unfortunately not. Attacks like this, especially the more high profile, there's going to be layers of obfuscation. The true source usually do not want to be identified, especially the bigger the target or the bigger the news impact is, because then they're going to become targets, even if it's non-US or non-Western entities. That they still don't want to be subject to that type of negative press, so to speak. In terms of who's behind it in general, you look at two different camps. You have the lower effort, just somebody on the street taking something like a malware as a service or just something they get from the dark web and throwing that out via botnet, or low effort, hacks using known public vulnerabilities. And then you have those sophisticated nation state actors that are looking to go for high profile targets, whether financially or espionage centered.
So talking about espionage, so in dealing with the nation state cyber adversary, what hacker trends are emerging from Russia, China, North Korea?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's easier to say what is not emerging, as weird as that sounds, because they're constantly changing their tactics. They want to evade detection. They're going to do layers of obfuscation. And what we're seeing is a constant change in the infrastructure they're using. They're obviously going to use, their own baked in custom malware, 0-day exploits that they have, using their vast resources. But they're also going to use different hosting providers. They're going to use whatever tactics they can to ensure that it can't be linked to them easily.
Well, for people who aren't techies, could you explain how exactly these kind of breaches take place?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a few different ways. The most common is what we refer to as phishing or spear phishing. So the end user, either in a broad spectrum manner, so phishing, they're going to get an email saying, click this link, your password's been compromised, you need to change it. And once you click that link, they have successfully bypassed the human factor. They have gotten the end user to interact to then get you to do follow-on actions that are either going to result in you giving them data through that, or downloading these info stealers or other malware that's then going to give them access to your computer. And from there, there's no interaction left that the victim needs to have. Their computer's infected. The attacker now controls all the subsequent actions. The spear phishing manner is a little bit more, I don't want to say sophisticated, but requires more effort. That is when the individual is targeted for a number of reasons. Maybe they're in a position of interest. They hold a good position in a company that's the target. And they're going to use information that they gain from open source or closed source resources. Maybe even they get data off the dark web that they use to influence that campaign. And they're going to send you a specific email tailored to you saying, here's something that's going to be interesting to you. Now do what we're telling you to do.
And what do they do with the data?
So it depends on what their motivation is. If they're financially motivated, maybe they're a lower level hacker or attacker. Maybe they just sell it on the dark web. Maybe they, try and use it to get access to a Google account and then say, we have your Google account, we're going to drain your your bank accounts with password resets, or we're going to sell it back to you. If it's more motivated, maybe they're going to sit on that, like in the case of Snowflake, for days to months to years, and they're going to wait for the correct opportunity to then leverage that for a big payoff.
Well, in terms of Snowflake, I think they're still looking to see how wide that breach was. Am I right?
Absolutely. And that goes back to, what I mentioned before. How long until you know the full impact and ramifications of a breach? And that's why when we talk about the power of the collective defense community and why this concept is so important in today's cybersecurity environment, if it takes you a long time to find the true impact and ramifications of a breach, how long until you can apply those controls and understand if you've been impacted? Whereas if you have a method to instantaneously share those indicators and that threat information, that's a powerful resource that you need.
Well, so how would a breach like that affect the average person or a company? And most important, I think, how can they take steps to prevent the data being stolen?
Absolutely. So first, looking at Snowflake specifically, it's unfortunate, but in this case, Snowflake is only half to blame. Looking at the write-up from Snowflake and Mandiant, it looks like, the credentials were stolen years beforehand in some cases. So the fact that the organizations didn't have, proper password policies in place, they didn't implement two-factor authentication, they didn't have network access controls configured on the Snowflake instances. There are a number of best security and basic security practices that organizations can take to ensure, even if their data is stolen, the attackers don't have an easy time using it. On the other side, a comprehensive cybersecurity portfolio is the best that you can do. And what we often see is, as resources dwindle, everyone's looking to consolidate their cybersecurity capabilities. They say, okay, we have an EDR that also does networking based, so an XDR solution, and that covers these, and then we'll also get a firewall. And they look for opportunities to reduce not only their cost, but their footprint, and consolidate into these subset of tools. But then you go to, that's also creating an environment where the attackers have less obstacles that they have to overcome. We actually published a few reports recently on EDR killing malware. So EDR malware that is specifically designed to evade endpoint detections. And so if you're putting all your eggs in one basket, all the attackers have to do is bypass one, maybe two things, and then they have full run of the mill.
We mentioned geopolitical risks and how certain countries are behind it. I mean, Russia, China, and North Korea. So where do most of these attacks come from?
Yeah, I think those are the big names: Russia, China, North Korea, and obviously each one have different motivations. North Korea's mostly financially motivated in a lot of their attacks. Russia has a big focus on Ukraine right now. So that goes back to the attribution piece, and that's something that is very difficult to do. You really need to be a very big company in the attribution space, like a Mandiant or an incident response company that has access to those specific tactics and techniques that they use, so that in the post-compromise analysis, you can look at those similarities and potentially attribute. But most of the time, it's very difficult to say exactly who and where these attacks are coming from because of those layers of obfuscation that they use.
Give us some high-profile examples of where it's happened that somebody, say, had an email and they clicked on a link.
Yeah, so one thing that I remember is a few years ago, there was when Twitter rolled out Twitter Blue for the first time, people were creating accounts and they were going through paying this the fee to get Twitter Blue check marks, and they were impersonating various personnel, companies, and not only were people doing this to kind of make light of the situation and joke around, but in certain cases, people were using this for crypto scams, saying, hey, I am this celebrity, this person, click this link because we're doing this event, we're selling this product. And they cracked down on it pretty quick. But the fact is, people gained a lot of money, or subsequently, people lost a lot of money off this. So, for me personally, I get emails, every day coming from my CEO, or on the personal side, my mother. And what they're doing is they're using a random email address, but then naming themselves as somebody close to you. So if you don't look past the surface, it looks like it's coming from your mom, your brother, your CEO. And they're saying, I have this critical need. I need you to do X. And the second you reply to that, you're already the victim and you're the fish on the hook.
So what do you do to prevent that? Because if it's hidden so well that it might be somebody close to you or somebody in government, that's somebody that might be emailing him every day, how do you prevent that?
Yeah, so it goes back to best practices. If you think that your CEO needs something specifically from you because she's in he or she are in a boardroom meeting and you're the only person that can solve this task, well, maybe you should give him a call. Maybe you should, send a message over Slack or Teams, whatever you use. If your mom is saying, or your brother, whomever, that they're in jail and, they need you to bail them out, well, maybe do another layer of verification before you send money to someone randomly. Or in this case, before you, send them, do a password reset or whatever else.
So how many attacks are you dealing with per day or per week?
Yeah, absolutely. So, at a lower level, there's activity in pretty much every customer that's happening daily. This doesn't have to be a major compromise or breach, but, a user clicks a link that they shouldn't have. And part of that process is ensuring that the activity was blocked. Not everything is a critical severe incident, but one misstep, one misdetection leads to that. So, we're seeing things every day. Major compromises, thankfully, are, not too prevalent. And that's a detriment to not only the cybersecurity tools, our own, plus, other tools that are in our customer environments, but also the sophistication of our customers. We have, high profile customers with, big cybersecurity budgets, good personnel with training and resources. But, outside of specific cases like, MGM, for instance, and the other casino that got, ransomware, I think it was last year. The smaller entities are really the ones, the mom and pop shops, the resource constrained schools, local governments. These are the ones that are really at risk because they often don't have the budgets, the resources, and the training and knowledge that you need to defend against these threats.
You mentioned how many customers IronNet has. How many users do you have, and or are you protecting?
Yeah, so it really ranges depending on the size of the customer. One company can be a small 100 to 250 people or a person company. Others can be over 1,000 users. So we definitely have some customers that have a much wider footprint, multi-state across the United States, or internationally, much larger footprints.
In terms of your customers, in terms of the breaches that you see, what is the percentage of, say, companies more for commercial purposes and something big like the National Health Service in the United Kingdom or a State Department in the US?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it really comes down to the smaller entities are usually, broad spectrum attacks. So, you'll see onesies and twosies here. You'll hear about it. The state and local governments, the healthcare organizations, those are usually longer campaigns that are leveraging multiple vulnerabilities over a longer period of time to then get them ransomed and extort those big numbers, the millions of dollars. Just recently in the U.S., we had Change Healthcare, which is still causing waves with the impact that it had on the healthcare system. And that goes back to, again, that was a best practices issue that led to lack of MFA, lack of these best security practices.
Are you always reactive, or can you be proactive in seeing that a threat's coming?
Yeah, so I like to look at it in two ways. On the reactive side, no matter how you look at it, if you have an alert that's presented by any cybersecurity tool, it's activity that's already occurred. So you're reactive. Whether that's a minute after it occurred, an hour, you're still in a responsive posture. You're triaging activity that's already occurred. When we talk about threat hunting in the proactive side, that's where the threat research and this emerging threat analysis comes in. So here at IronNet, that's the bread and butter of our threat feed. We're looking for not the known indicators. So a compromise occurs, a mandate publishes the IPs, the domains that were used, or the exploits that were used. We're looking for the techniques, the behaviors that the actors use when they establish their infrastructure, or the types of communications that the malware makes from a networking standpoint. And we use these to then identify infrastructure as it's being established. So before it's commercially known in those post-breach analyses.
Sure. Okay. So there is this common notion that there are two types of companies or two types of organizations, the ones that have already been hacked and the ones that will be hacked. How accurate is that?
Well, in my opinion, I don't think that every organization has malware on them. They're already, infected. Going through and trying to, do a proof of value for, our product, for instance, there's always this notion that you need to find something in the customer environment to prove that value, to say, here is what we're providing you that no one else did because no one else detected this. And if there's nothing there, there's nothing to find. Now, the concept of it's only a matter of time is very real. The attackers always have an advantage because we're defending against known and loosely unknown threats from a defense standpoint. But the attackers, all they have to do is get right once, right? They have a 0-day vulnerability. So an exploit that is commercially unknown. It's not attributed. It's not understood from the defense standpoint. If they have one of these capabilities, they can exploit, any vulnerable device to that, and the defender might not know. So as they advance and they evade detections, your organization may not be the target today, but if it is one day, you stand a pretty good risk of falling victim.
Is AI helping these adversaries develop malware that is increasingly difficult to defy?
So AI is a very big component of cybersecurity right now, both on the defensive and the offensive side. I think as AI continues to develop, it definitely has a part to play in malware generation from the attackers. What I am fearful of, and I think that is going to continue being the trend, is using these AI components to enable the malware to evade detections even more. So, not only from a signature standpoint, but having the signature change every single time it's deployed, which is already a concept, but to be further refined and capable as AI tools and resources for the attackers become more prevalent.
Well, as AI, can it help you as well?
Yeah, so I go back to the defenders, have to constantly adapt to what the attackers are throwing at them. AI certainly bridges that gap, and you can see pretty much in every cybersecurity company and solution out there, everyone's trying to bake in AI in any way that they can, not just as a buzzword, but as a resource for assisting the triage efforts, assisting the detection and subsequent response of maybe lower level alerts, or in some cases, higher level alerts, automated blocking, based on these, AI inputs and analysis. I mean, it's hard to defend against what you don't know, right? If you have a defense posture that is looking at X, but then tomorrow Z comes in, well, now you have to completely shift and say, well, what do we have to defend against Z? And that's why these security tools and practices are so important, because it's not a matter of if. Something will bypass your firewall, your human factor, your endpoint, your network detection. Having those layers are very important so that when something misses the detection, something else is there to pick it up.
Blake Cahen from IronNet, thanks so much for speaking to us.
Thanks for having me.